welcome back to Golf Training Hacks. Are your hamstrings a little tight? Are your adductors stiff? You know, the adductors are the muscles on the inside of your thigh. And when you come back from a round, is your lower back a little stiff and tight? Well, do you think hamstring tightness and adductor tightness can make your lower back stiff and painful? Well, I'm going to say this a different way. If your hamstrings are tight, if your adductors are tight, and you play golf, I bet you come back from a round with lower back stiffness and pain. And I also bet you sit a lot. Now, how are these things related? Well, it's all related to our hips. So let's start from the beginning. If you sit a lot, if your glute max and abs are weakened, because that's what happens when you sit a lot, your pelvis gets tilted too far forward. That's number one, because your glute max and your abs are responsible for, pelvic position. And if they're weak, the pelvis is going to tilt too far forward. Also, when you sit a lot, your hip flexors get tight and weak. Now, your hip flexors attach to the inside of your thigh, they go over your pelvis, and they attach into your lumbar spine. So if they're tight, they're pulling your lumbar spine into too much extension. So now you have a pelvis that's tilted too far forward and a lumbar spine that's in too much extension. Now, since your hamstrings and your adductors are attached to the bottom of your pelvis, and then your hamstrings are attached to the top of your shin bone, when your pelvis is tilted too far forward, your hamstring goes on a stretch, and that's a chronic stretch. It's always stretched because the pelvis is always tilted forward. Not only that, but since the glute max is weak, the hamstrings are trying to pull this pelvis back into alignment. So they're overworked because they're doing the work of the glute max. Okay? Lumbar extension, we have too much. We have anterior pelvic tilt, that's in the wrong position. We have hamstrings and adductors that are working too hard and are in a chronic stretch. Now we add rotation. But what happens is, because the hamstrings are pulling on the bottom of your pelvis, it's a little harder to rotate. And also because your pelvis is tilted forward, it's a little harder to rotate. So where do you get the rotation? Well, for many recreational golfers, they get it in their lumbar spine. A lumbar spine, now, that is in too much extension and is unable to buffer the forces of a golf swing effectively. Now, there's a lot of force in a golf swing. There's rotational force, shearing, and compressive force. So you add all that up, and you have lower back stiffness and pain. So how do we fix that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is improve glute max strength. Because if we can improve our glute max strength, that means we can realign the pelvis and take some of the pressure off of our hamstrings. And in this video, we're also going to work on some soft tissue work for your adductors and your hamstrings. But you don't want to do the hamstring work first, because by making your hamstrings more flexible, let's say, by stretching them or mobilizing them, without improving your glute max strength, you're destabilizing the joints even more. Because don't forget, the hamstrings are what's holding on to this pelvis. So if these become, let's say, even more stretched out, the pelvis becomes even more destabilized, and then since your lumbar spine sits on your pelvis, your lumbar spine becomes even more destabilized, and then you add rotation to that, and it only gets worse. Okay guys, you got that? You work on your glute max first, get that stronger, and then we're going to work on some hamstring and adductor soft tissue techniques. And in this video, we're really going to work on deadlift technique, because deadlifting is a very good exercise to improve glute max strength, and it's actually a very good exercise for golfers. So let's get started. So how do you perform a deadlift? Well, first of all, you can do a deadlift with a barbell and plates. You can do a deadlift with a kettlebell, and you can do a deadlift with dumbbells. So it's basically just picking a weight up off the floor. But I'm first going to show you the technique for doing a deadlift with a barbell and plates. So we use an overhand grip. Now, you may have seen people deadlift, whether it be in a powerlifting meet, in the gym, or maybe in a strongman competition, with a reverse grip. Well, that's fine, but we're teaching it this way for a few reasons. First, At Inner Strength Sports Conditioning, we've been involved in Olympic lifting, so this is the way you have to hold the bar. We train our athletes with a grip like this because a lot of them who are going to college and playing sports have to learn how to clean a bar, and this is the grip for that. It's also a more balanced position. As far as your foot position, shoulder width, a little wider, you decide it's where you're comfortable. You don't want to be extremely wide, and you don't want to be extremely narrow. That's a different exercise. So start with a shoulder width position and then work it from there. And you want your feet to be parallel or a slight angle, 5-10 degrees, let's say. You don't want them to be at a severe angle. So you can start with your feet parallel and work from there. From the side, I'm going to put the bar down for a second. First, you set your shoulder in a neutral position. Find a spot in the floor so you can see, because you don't want your head moving back and forth. You want to keep your spine in that, or you want to keep your cervical spine in that neutral extension. So you're going to find a spot on the floor. You're going to hip hinge back. You're going to drop your hips and your hands to the bar, and then that's the position you're going to start. From the front, neutral spine, pick a spot on the floor, hip hinge back, drop your hips, and grab the bar. You want your hips to externally rotate somewhat. That's a stronger position. So as you're lifting the bar, it shouldn't look like this. It should look like this. So my knees look like they're turning out a little bit because my hips are externally rotating. My feet feel like they're screwing into the ground without turning. So as I'm lifting the bar, I'm pulling it up like this. We're not lifting it like this. That's a very weak position. I'm going to hold the bar now and just put it down to the spot where it would be if there were plates on it. So you hip hinge back, your back's in a good position. So that's where the bar would be. So if you're too close to the bar, as you hip hinge down, you're going to knock the bar forward. If you're too far away from the bar, as you hip hinge down, clearly you're going to be too far away. Now that's a really bad position to be lifting any heavy weight in because you have a lot of shearing force on your back. If that's your spine and you're in that position and the weight's out here, the further the weight is out, the more shearing pressure is put on that spine, and that's a guaranteed injury. So when you're lifting the bar out of the deadlift position, so neutral spine, hip hinge back, I go to grab the bar, I'm pulling the bar into me, I'm bowing over it, and it's dragging over my pants, and I'm standing up. I'm not shrugging, and I'm not arching. I'm just standing up. As I bring it back down, I hip hinge back. I come back to this spot. Now, keep my back in the same position. My knees go back. I'm keeping this bar in my center of gravity so that it's easier to lift. So as far as the position goes, at the bottom when you're starting the lift, so I'm hip hinging back, I'm down, so that's where I would be. So the bar is pulled in to you as you're lifting up. You can hear the bar drag along my pants. I'm dragging this bar. I want this bar as close as I can to my center of gravity. Think about the extreme position, which would be out here. That's a lot of shearing force. There's no way you're going to lift a lot of weight like that. And it's also extremely dangerous for your back. So this bar has to be close to you. So I'm here, back stays neutral. I'm pulling it in. I stand up. I'm not arching and I'm not shrugging. I'm just standing up. So that's the technique for a barbell deadlift with an Olympic style grip and overhand grip. It's the same if you had dumbbells, if you had kettlebells, you're going to do the same thing. So when you set up for the deadlift, your feet are roughly shoulder width. It depends on your comfort level. You can be a little wider, a little tighter, and you can have your feet parallel or a little bit on an angle, but you don't want them really far out. That's a very weak position. So now you're going to hip hinge back, right? So that's a hip hinge. You're hip hinging back and dropping your hips to the bar. So I'm hip hinging back and I'm dropping my hips to the bar and my shins are just about touching the bar. If I came too close and I hip hinged back, I'd be pushing the bar forward. If I was too far away and I hip hinge back, now I'm reaching out over my center of gravity and it's much harder to lift. But not only is it much harder to lift, but you have a lot of shearing force on your back because the weight is out here and you're lifting it like this instead of keeping it into your center of gravity. So you step up to the bar, hip hinge back, drop your hips and hands to the bar, get a good grip, set your hips, so that's an Olympic style deadlift. In this video, I'll show you how to get some release into stiff and tight hamstrings. Now to do this, you're going to need something to sit on. I'm using this plyo box. You're going to need some kind of a roller, something like this, something like that would do, anything that you have. Now you're going to use the plyo box as a platform and you're going to place your hamstring on the roller. Now what I'll do first is I'm going to roll up and down a little bit just to see if there's any areas that I might find that are either maybe painful or particularly stiff. So let's say I settle on, towards the middle of my hamstring. So there's a couple of things you can do. First thing you can do is breathe into it and just let the weight of your body and legs sink into that stiff tissue or that trigger point. So I'm going to take a deep breath in. I'm going to release the breath. As I release the breath, I'm sinking into this roller. So that's one way to get some release. Just let that neurological system relax. Breathing and mobilization is very important to do that together because when you breathe deeply, a deep diaphragmatic breath, in and out through your nose, you're sending a signal to your neurological system to relax. This position isn't a threat. If your brain perceives that it's not a threat, it's going to release the muscles a little easier and you're not fighting against the brain's protective mechanism. The next way you can do this is to just hold down your leg on the spot that's stiff or a little bit painful and move it around. So I'm just going to look for areas that, might be a little harder to take or a little stiffer, a little more painful, but I'm still pretty much on the same spot. I'm just, moving my foot around to see if I can get a little different input into that area that I'm working on. That's the second way. Now the third way is you can contract and relax. Muscles will release the pressure, and using isometric contractions plus breathing is a really effective way to release tension in muscles. So I'm going to take a deep breath in. Now I'm going to hold it for 4 seconds and I'm going to contract my hamstrings. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, and now I'm going to release. So I'm releasing the breath and I'm releasing the contraction at the same time. So you take a deep breath in, you're going to hold it, then you're going to release. Now you breathe in and you hold for about the same amount of time. So I'm going to breathe in for about 4 seconds roughly. I'm going to hold it for roughly 4 seconds. And I'm going to try to exhale for about 8 seconds. Ready? Here we go. Okay, simple enough, and you can just repeat that, or you can combine these things. So I can take a deep breath in, hold it, release the contraction and the breath, then move around. Deep breath in, Contract and hold. And release. And move around. Okay? So that's a pretty simple, easy way to get some release into stiff and tight hamstrings. How do we get some release into stiff and tight adductors? The adductors are the muscles on the interior of your thigh. Well, one way we can do it is with, let's say, a pole or a barbell, anything that you can use to roll. So I'm going to get into this kind of a Z position or a lightning bolt position here. I'm going to place the roller somewhere along the inside of my leg, and depending on how tender and tight you are there, I'm going to just put some pressure and roll. And I'm going to guess that a lot of you guys might feel that this is pretty tender. I mean, it's pretty tender on me too. You could actually use a barbell to do this, but I think that most of us will find that just getting some of this pretty moderate pressure on the inside of your leg, on these adductors, is going to help. Now, if you want to increase the pressure, you can use your other leg. Now, what we can do is find a trigger point. So I have one right there, and I can just breathe into this position. So I'm going to take a deep breath in and release. And try to let the pressure of this pole sink into that trigger point. So deep breath in and release. So I'm breathing in and out through my nose. The other way to do it is to roll back and forth. Now while I'm doing this, obviously I'm talking to you, but you should be breathing. So I'm just breathing in and out through my nose. Deep diaphragmatic breathing in and out through your nose sends a relaxing signal to your neurological system that these positions aren't a threat. Now you want to do that because when your brain senses a threat or perceives a threat, it's going to shut things down and make things tighter. So when you're mobilizing, that's going to be counterproductive. You want to breathe, relax, and mobilize. In this case, we're just getting some release into these muscles, these stiff and tight muscles. Okay, so that's pretty simple, and that's a way to get some release into some stiff and tight adductors. So if you found that helpful, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. And don't forget to check out other videos on the channel to help you improve your movement quality and keep that youthful fluid swing while staying injury-free.